Today, the stories of two murder cases. One in Green Bay, Wisconsin. The other near Melbourne, Australia. In our first case, a marriage runs into trouble when there's news of a steamy affair.
He was leading a double life, which was destroying their relationship.
Then, a surprise visit turns violent and deadly.
What really went on in that house?
In our second case, a wife suddenly seems to have abandoned her family.
Her relatives couldn't believe it. She loved her kids.
A mystery that drags on for years until an old oil barrel is finally opened.
What's inside is not what they're expecting to see.
Will justice be served for these crimes? Two cases of love gone wrong. Coming up now on Murderous Affairs. Green Bay, Wisconsin. Sirens pierce the morning air as police and paramedics respond to a 911 call.
Bob Bulick had called 911, saying he'd just found his wife Pam unconscious and floating in a bathtub.
They try to resuscitate her, but it's no use. She's pronounced dead.
Pam's a 35-year-old mother of two, a high school teacher who works with emotionally disturbed children.
Police can tell right away that something's not right about this case. Pam was a very fit, healthy woman. She ran marathons and she just drowns in her tub.
Bob Bulick is a special education teacher at a nearby junior high.
Bob seemed very accommodating with police. He lets them search the whole house and agrees to go down to the station to give a statement.
Bob explains he'd left home the day before to go on a trip. He was on duty with the Marine Corps Reserves and had an assignment in Denver.
But Bob never made it to the airport. He had car trouble, missed his flight.
Instead of making a later flight, Bob decided to return home and surprise his wife.
He thought it'd be a kind of sweet, romantic thing to do, because he and Pam had been having marital problems.
It's a far cry from when they first met and fell in love. Bob and Pam had been college sweethearts while attending Wisconsin State University and married soon after graduation. But after 14 years of marriage, the relationship was under serious strain.
He was upfront about it with police. He admitted he'd been having an affair with this other teacher in his school district.
A few months earlier, Pam had found an incriminating note in Bob's pocket written to his girlfriend. She confronted him, and he confessed the affair had been going on for a year.
The Bulicks had been in marriage counseling, and Bob said they were really trying to work through it.
Bob tells police he arrived back in Green Bay around 10:30 at night.
This is where it starts to get a little odd. Rather than driving straight home, he parks his car at a nearby parking lot so he can surprise his wife, he says.
Apparently, pulling into the driveway wouldn't be surprise enough.
When he arrives home, his hopes for a romantic evening quickly evaporate.
He tells police he and Pam soon wound up arguing. She was still angry about his affair and simply doesn't trust him.
Later in the night, Bob wakes up alone in bed and smells trouble.
According to his statement, he heard an engine running and went down to the garage and discovered his wife in the passenger seat of their van, unconscious, engine on, garage door closed.
He claims Pam, distraught over their failed marriage, has attempted suicide.
He turns off the ignition, carries her back upstairs and puts her to bed.
The next morning, Pam is groggy and unresponsive.
She was supposed to run a half marathon that morning, so Bob runs a bath and gets her up, drags her to the bathroom, props against the hamper, and tells her the bath is ready whenever she wants to get in.
Bob then does chores and ran errands before returning to the bathroom and finding Pam face down in the water.
Bob says he pulled her from the tub and tried to administer CPR, but it was too late. Before calling 911, he calls their marriage counselor and then calls police.
It's a remarkable story. Detectives were obviously suspicious of him from the start, but he remained cooperative and even offered to take a lie detector test. They said they didn't need one. Not yet, anyway.
His story is quite frankly outlandish, but sometimes people do behave oddly in these types of circumstances, and detectives have to at least consider his version of events.
Detectives launch an exhaustive investigation, looking into the plausibility of Bob's story.
His car supposedly broke down on his way to the airport, but there were no police reports of a disabled vehicle on the highway.
Police went to the gas stations along the route, showing Bob's photograph, but nobody recognized him.
Bob's account of Pam's apparent suicide attempt raises more red flags.
Pam's friends confirmed she was very upset about Bob's affair, and Bob's girlfriend suspected Pam had been calling her. She'd gotten a series of calls at home and at work. She'd answer, and the caller would just hang up.
Police impound the vehicle, and a team of forensic analysts examine the interior.
They determined it would be impossible for anyone to start the engine from the passenger seat.
So that means she had to get into the driver's seat, start up the vehicle, then get out, walk around and get into the passenger seat. Why would she do that?
Forensic analysts also find evidence of urine on the passenger seat.
Pam apparently lost control of her bodily functions, but that isn't consistent with carbon monoxide poisoning.
So that raises the question, how did Pam wind up unconscious in the passenger seat of a running automobile?
An autopsy report reveals more details of Pam's final hours.
The coroner found bruising around the head, enough to indicate that she was likely knocked unconscious several hours before she died.
But curiously, the autopsy also provides findings consistent with Bob's version of events.
Pam's blood showed a remarkably high level of carbon monoxide poisoning, but she didn't die from that. The cause of death was drowning.
That's consistent with Bob's story, but it doesn't get him off the hook. He could have rendered her unconscious, exposed her to carbon monoxide, and then drowned her.
Investigators also determined that if Pam died, Bob's money troubles would disappear.
The couple had been having financial trouble, and there just happened to be 2 life insurance policies taken out on Pam.
Bob stood to gain $70,000, but only if her death was ruled accidental.
At a hearing several weeks after Pam's death, a judge reviews the evidence and finds sufficient probable cause for the arrest of Bob Bulick. He is charged with first-degree intentional murder. But for prosecutors, the case is anything but a slam dunk.
New evidence starts to poke holes in the prosecution's case.
Coming up, could the Bulicks have been victims of a bizarre home invasion?
The intruder finds Pam in the living room, sneaks up on her, and hits her over the head hard.
Green Bay, Wisconsin. When 35-year-old Pam Bulick is found dead in her bathtub at her home, suspicion immediately falls on her husband, Bob.
Bob had the opportunity, motive, and his wife had threatened to divorce him after finding out about his long-time affair.
Shortly after his arrest, Bob Bulick is released on $100,000 bail.
His father mortgaged his house and put up the money to get his son out of jail.
Once he's out on bail, he certainly doesn't show much remorse about his wife's death or the fact that he'll have to stand trial for her murder.
Just 2 months after Pam's death, Bob's mistress, another teacher in his school district, moves into his home with her 2 children.
It was a bold move. It only made him look more guilty.
For prosecutors, however, proving his guilt remains challenging. At a pretrial hearing, Bulick's defense attorneys file a motion to exclude evidence from the case.
Your case is always going to be stronger if you can show your suspect was engaged in a pattern of incriminating activity. And in this case, prosecutors had that.
This wasn't the first time police had been called to the Bulick home. 8 months prior to her death, Pam had been attacked while celebrating their 13th wedding anniversary.
The couple had been enjoying a romantic dinner when Bob hears a noise.
He goes to investigate, and the next thing he knows, someone sneaks up and hits him on the head.
When he comes to, he sees Pam's also been knocked unconscious.
Bob could only give a vague description of his attacker. There were no signs of a break-in, nothing was taken.
And Bob was barely injured, whereas Pam suffered a major skull fracture, swelling of the brain, and she had to be admitted to the ICU.
To investigators, it looked like Bob had been planning to kill Pam for some time and had already tried once, but failed.
The defense didn't want the jury to hear about this, and so they filed a motion to exclude any mention of this evidence at trial.
Agreeing that it could be prejudicial, the judge on the case grants the motion.
So the previous attack is out, which means they have much less proof that Pam's murder was premeditated.
Without premeditation, there's more room for reasonable doubt and acquittal.
8 months after the murder of his wife, Bob Bulick stands trial at Brown County Circuit Court in Green Bay.
The state's theory of the crime is that Bob was eager to get rid of his wife so he could get the insurance money and start life anew with his longtime girlfriend.
He left for the airport, then snuck back, parking far away so he wouldn't be noticed. His plan was likely to kill Pam in her sleep, but when he found his wife still awake, he had to think fast and move to Plan B.
Prosecutors allege Bob knocked Pam unconscious, dragged her to the garage, and placed her in the passenger seat of the van. He then started the engine.
Perhaps realizing that carbon monoxide from the exhaust could threaten him or their 2 children, he goes back and turns off the engine.
But she's not dead yet, so he takes her upstairs and drowns her in the tub.
The defense offers a different theory.
2 therapists Pam had seen testified that she was suffering from depression because of Bob's affair. She'd even suffered from memory lapses, and the defense suggested she was suffering from some dissociative disorder.
A friend of Pam's confirmed the memory loss and said Pam worried that Bob might be drugging her, but there was never any proof of that.
The defense theorized that after Bob and Pam argued, she slipped into one of those dissociative states and wound up in the van with the engine on.
Bob Bulick testifies on his own behalf, claiming he didn't realize how serious her condition was.
He also explained away her bruises, saying he was so out of it he had trouble carrying her up the stairs, and she may have gotten banged up in the process.
On December 13, 1984, Bob Bulick is found guilty of homicide by reckless conduct.
They didn't feel there was enough evidence for murder, but found he demonstrated a conscious disregard for the safety of another.
Essentially, they found that Bob hadn't done enough to save Pam when he found her in the van.
The judge sentences Bob Bulick to 10 years in prison, the maximum allowable sentence under the law. In 1985, Bob Bulick and his longtime mistress are married in prison.
He appeals his conviction in 1986, but the appeal is denied.
And after just 2 years, his new marriage falls apart, and his wife files for divorce.